Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 94th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And as you know, for June, the theme is all about corporate social responsibility. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about meaningful engagement with social campaigns and not simply jumping on the bandwagon. I wanted to make an episode on this topic as just over a year on from the brutal murder of George Floyd, there really hasn't been as much genuine change as I would have hoped and innovation, as well as the many other pressing local, national, and global issues that we've seen. This spans removal of statues, taking the knee in sport, the rape and murder of Sarah Everard, the misunderstanding and threatening towards Stonewall. There is rarely a week goes by where equality, diversity, and inclusion topics aren't in the news in the UK. Then add to this No More SARS campaign in Nigeria that is still ongoing, conflicts, wars, and displacements with a backdrop of a pandemic, and things really come into sharp and stark focus. It's clear, especially in big organizations, that many people care and want to do something. They see these things, they're affected by them. It might be that they have families in different countries, friends in different countries, they've lived in other countries where things are going on. And often the people at the top of an organization have their attention diverted away, and the staff who want to make headway and change things aren't always heard. And last year, we saw many organizations who put black squares for Blackout Tuesday on their social media channels. There were statements and there were pledges. But has there really been tangible change? In the UK, we are currently debating if and why football players should be allowed to take the knee for race equality. Now, if we really cared about Black Lives Matter, would we even be talking about this? Would it even be an issue? I'd like to think it absolutely wouldn't be. And on an organizational level, I have heard a deafening silence when it comes to commenting on the race disparity report that was released earlier this year in the UK. Where were the statements and pledges? Where were the updates on the action plans? I was quite mystified by it all. Now, I do realize that it could put some organizations in a bit of a tricky situation because it was a government report or a report that was commissioned by the government. However, I think it would have been very timely to say 8-9 months on from the brutal murder of George Floyd, or 9 months on from really genuinely starting this race equality work, this is what we're doing and this is how we're continuing. And yes, we've seen that the government's released a report, but we're not changing what we're doing. And I think that would have been a really useful way to do things and to communicate what was actually happening, because it links together the denial, not addressing things systemically, and the fact that change has to be made for good, not fleetingly. And for example, it's Men's Health Week this week and Refugee Week in the UK. So what's this got to do with organisations, you might say? And my response back to you is, if you're serious about mental health, mental ill health recovery and well-being, you may know that suicide, for example, is higher amongst men than women. It's currently a 3-to-1 ratio. So for every one woman that dies by suicide, 3 men will die. One of the reasons being that there is in the West a toxic masculinity culture, and phrases that are commonly used in the workplace like man up, don't help. It's about not showing emotions, being tough, and sucking it up. And some of the other phrases that I'm probably not aware of that are used that I wouldn't really want to repeat on a podcast. So Men's Health Week is a great platform, given that it's a national week, to start a conversation, promote things like mental health first aiders, mental health champions, promote the work the Samaritans do, have fundraisers for the Samaritans, have speakers, role models that have experienced mental ill health, maybe hid it, became very unwell, and have gone through their own recovery journey out the other end. That is fantastic. And I would never say don't do that. However, what about systemic change? And this is what I'm saying. It's great to have those things, but if it's just for a week and you're jumping on a bandwagon, or there aren't the resources and scope to do more, then we're not really creating systems whereby men in this case can support each other, women and non-binary staff at work, to have conversations about mental health, physical health, everything in between. There needs to be a pattern set where there isn't an expectation to overwork, competition between people, alpha male environments, as they're called, dog eat dog pressure, where parental adoption or paternity leave are seen as political. So what are the ways this is integrated into mainstream policies, practices, procedures, and culture? Equally, with Refugee Week, this has increasingly been seen as a politically hotbed topic, and I have really seen that change over the last 10 years, which does make me quite sad, and it's seen as a minefield. But actually, if we all care about race equality and your organization might have made a statement, you might have written a statement, this is essential. Now, of course, it will depend on the organization, but why not work with, fundraise, provide pro bono support to organizations like Refugee Action or Refugee Council? Businesses keep talking about a skills shortage, so why not work with your local chamber of commerce or relevant business organization to positively devise a way of engaging with government on letting refugees work and simplifying the process? That's just an example. Or maybe a member of staff has been to an event and writes a blog about attending a refugee event and how other staff members can get involved. And do check out episode 92 for more information about volunteering and setting up a corporate scheme. You can also do giving via payroll, and you could change your charities every month, but that shows commitment. And of course, not everyone will opt in. They might not be able to afford to. There shouldn't be an expectation on people, but it does create more than simply doing something like a Blackout Tuesday or sharing only one social media post. Empty statements are super problematic, especially in big businesses who have resources to really change things and culture and be exemplars. But when they make empty statements, it feels as if they're trying to make even more profit from the latest liberation trend. And this was seen with Amazon, and there was a lot of anger. To enact real change, I will say this, it is hard. It's not easy. And you know my catchphrase, it's not a one and done. All organizations have to accept it's uncomfortable, and this work is really, really not easy, and it's not quick, and we don't live in an ideal world. But what it is about is sustaining the momentum of dismantling systems that perpetuate all the inequities we see in society and the workplace. We see a rape and a murder of women. We see sexual harassment, sexual abuse in the workplace, and they are not separate things. They are on a sliding scale. We see systemic injustices, we see homophobia, we see transphobia in society, and equally we see it in the workplace. So every part and element of society has to play a role in the fight against any kind of injustice. And collectively, we have to look at every system and the ways in which systems interact and the way we act individually that feeds into our institutional systems, which feed into our overarching governmental systems, and the role in systemic isms that we see. This is especially true for workplaces where the school playground culture can often persist, but we can and should know better as adults that this is not a healthy, beneficial, or appropriate way to be. And in fact, children can teach us a lot. I really hope you're enjoying the content of this podcast, and I want you to keep listening, but I'd also love to keep you up to date. And if so, why not join my bi-monthly newsletter? Well, you received updates about hot topics and things that are happening. The link is in the show notes, but it is bit.ly/DMSYNR. So given what I've just said, what can organizations do then to change the status quo and to not just jump on the bandwagon, sort of look around and think, oh my goodness, our competitors are doing this, we better do it. Now that might be part of it, but there's a lot more to it than that. And firstly, I would say it's really about benchmarking where you think you are using data and across all the different areas. I'm talking about equality areas, but this could be, so many things that equality encompasses. Could also be about health and safety. There are lots of things that go wrong with health and safety. Could be about sustainability, whatever the aim is. And this is the other part of it. It's about being proactive and not reactive and not jumping. In fact, organizations should already have had statements on race equity and how they're challenging things around sexism, around misogyny, around protecting female staff. It should be part, in fact, of the values, aims, and missions of an organization. So firstly, benchmark where you think you are using data, surveys, and being clear about the definition and how it does fit in with your organization's values, aims, mission, and vision as set by your board of trustees, your board of governors, your C-suite, your senior leaders, whoever does that. Then think really carefully about what you say and what's the action behind it. So if you say we really care and this is obviously very tragic, yes, they're not untrue things, they're very true. But what's the action? How are you going to stop it from happening again? How are you going to contribute to that? What challenge will you do? So what's the action behind the words and what can you do? There might be constraints. There might be things that you can't do because of how your governance is, how you've been set up. Maybe you really could never make comments on things that are happening in the news. But what action could you have? And there'll always be something. Recruitment is often a place where people go to, and that's great. But how about the experience of staff once they're in a role that are from groups that you haven't seen in your workplace before, backgrounds that you haven't seen in their workplace before? What will you actually do and how will you monitor that? Listen and act on staff's words. So something that was very popular was having focus groups. And yes, I think listening groups are super important. Focus groups are very, very powerful, but people want something to be done afterwards. So don't let things go into the ether. It's not a case of we've listened and now we're done. It's a case of we're listening and this is what we're doing based on what we've heard. I would also say reduce your comparisonitis and don't always look around to see what others are doing and think, oh, sugar, we better be doing that. Yes, absolutely be guided by best practice, but you don't have to or need to copycat others. Be a leader and exemplar and come up with your own plan. By all means, be a leader and set up a group and say, this is what we're thinking of doing. We want to make sure we get it right. Who are our stakeholders? How can we do this? And if they're external people from statutory, voluntary, or consultancy organizations, you do have to have a budget to support them with that. And that could also be part of your corporate social responsibility vision. The other thing to say is this doesn't have to be a bolt-on, it doesn't have to be an add-on, and it doesn't have to be, oh my goodness, a huge other section on the internet. We've got to create more plans. Look at your existing action plans, look at your existing strategies. Maybe you've got a 2020 to 25 strategy, 2020 to 2030 strategy. And where does this fit in? It doesn't have to be a case of adding more to your plate, more exhaustion, more groups. It can be, let's add it to the meetings that we already have. We're going to have a specific agenda item. I also understand that depending on the size of your organization, depending on how things have been done, you may not have the expertise. So do get advice from the person that you think is right for you. Ask for recommendations, look on LinkedIn. Maybe you've read an article and you want to contact people. Make sure there's a budget because you need to pay for this expert advice to shape the way going forward. And it might be that this advice is not going to do it all for you or tell you how to do it. Maybe it's just a couple of hours to talk it through with someone who has the information and expertise and has done this before, so can support you. And I would strongly recommend that. And then this will also help you with continuing the momentum. And then training can be part of the solution, or it can be part of the problem, actually. People often leap to training, but the key thing is with training is what is the readiness? If an organization isn't ready for training, people have different understandings, are at different levels. Throwing in training can be problematic. Whereas if you get everyone on an even keel, you've done your listening and you've readied people for whatever training you think you need or whatever the gaps are, people are going to be receptive to it, people are going to be more open to it, and they're going to be more likely to engage with it. And do check out my episode 65 about why training isn't a panacea. So when it's done right, what does this actually look like? Well, it's normally quite a long program of work. Organizations that are bought into this or want to use a particular week or month or event to not just jump on the bandwagon, but to make proper cultural change, will absolutely use it as a springboard, but really acknowledge that it's part of a longer program of work with reflection, with training, with a curricula that goes on for a long period of time, encouraging all their staff to attend it. If it's a client-based organization, business, to how they will influence clients. So as they change their way of working, they also do have a job in influencing their clients and people they work with on how they work. And that can be so powerful. It really does have a ripple effect. They acknowledge that it's about having difficult conversations where maybe behavior previously wasn't challenged, or where people don't understand what's going on, or maybe make really inappropriate comments, having those conversations to explain why, not being afraid of really using those active bystander models, and knowing that they have to sit with the discomfort. And at times it's very uncomfortable. And also realizing that they will lose staff, and that's okay, that they have a choice. And this is where the business is going. If they don't want to come on board, then they can leave, and it will be amicable and it will be professionally appropriate. If this discomfort or if the direction that the business is going in isn't suitable for an individual or a group of individuals, that they do have options. And that can be very difficult because, of course, there are costs involved with that. However, reputational costs are far, far worse. And working towards things and not away in the face of things coming to the surface. That's the other thing, that when you do this work, there's going to be all sorts of feelings and emotions going on at the organizational level, at team level, at the individual level. So having those conversations, keep facing into that and not thinking, oh, it's really uncomfortable now, I think we're going to stop. Because of course, whenever we try something new ways of working, new habits, whether it's journaling, whether it's doing a walk every day, whether it's, painting a tiny bit of your wall after work, whatever it is, there are days where we don't want to do it. There are days where it feels uncomfortable. There are days where we're highly irritated, but it's about facing into those things that come into the surface. So what can you do then to make genuine change and not just jump on the bandwagon? So firstly, it's about being honest with yourself, being honest with about your company, business, organization's readiness to get your data and set your baseline, which you might already have, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. Obtain advice and get buy-in to make sure that you can go the right way. Training is part of the answer and not the whole picture. Be bold and clear with what you want to do, and don't sort of 360 your head round and think, oh, what's everyone doing? So be really brave, if you like, in what you're doing and sticking to your vision. There's no need to create more. You can mainstream it all and add it to the existing plans. And check in and report on actions, and report this in your annual plan. So it's not a flash in the pan and it's genuine engagement in an issue. It's got to be more than Blackout Tuesday squares. So I really hoped you've enjoyed this episode. And if you want to know more about how my coaching can help you with this topic, do check out diverseminds.co.uk/solutions/coaching, and that link is in the show notes. And if you don't want to have a package with me, do remember that I do offer 1 hour power hours for £150 plus VAT for any consultancy support for that one-off check-in. And the resources I mentioned in this episode were episode 92 of the podcast about volunteering and how volunteering benefits mental health, and episode 65, what training is not a panacea. And if you enjoyed this episode, why not leave me a review on Apple Podcasts? And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.